Hello and welcome to Lesson 5 of National 5 Computing Science Database Design and Development. Today we're looking at data dictionaries, what they are, what they look like, how do you create one. A data dictionary is a table. It's a design table that you create to describe the tables, fields and data types and the validation and all that sort of stuff that will be in the database that you're about to create. Planning things before you create them is always a good idea. It saves you from getting confused along the way or forgetting things. If you plan it first, it really makes the creation of the database a lot easier. And that's exactly what data dictionaries are for. This is an example of a data dictionary. You can see that we've got the field names we're going to include in the table: employee ID, first name, surname, hourly rate, and the basis. We've also got the data types that those fields will be. And for text fields, we've set a field size. The field size would just be whatever you think would be a reasonable maximum length. So this is the limit of characters that you're allowed to type in. So a first name, in this example, I am assuming that there will never be a first name that is more than 30 characters. The reason you do this is because database systems set aside a number of bytes and kilobytes for each field. So however many records you have, it will have that number of bytes set aside for that field. So first name, it will set aside 30 bytes. For surname, it will set aside 40 bytes. Now, if you didn't have a field size, it would just have an unlimited number of bytes, potentially, set aside for each of those text fields in each record. And as you can imagine, that would explode into enormous file sizes for each database. So that's why we set a field size for each text field. Anyway, moving on, primary or foreign key. Well, you can see here employee ID will be the primary key. And finally, we would show the validation that will be applied to each of these fields. You can see that employee ID is the only one that we've said is required. So that has a presence check. But for hourly rate, we're using a range check. It must be greater than or equal to 4.81. And in this case, it's got a pound sign, but it would just be a number field. So you wouldn't include the pound sign when entering the data. And for basis, we have restricted choice. We've got full-time, part-time, and ad hoc. You may notice that the field size for basis is 9, which is very specific. And that's because the largest piece of text in that restricted choice is 9. You cannot enter anything that is more than 9 there. Full-time has 9 characters because you include the space, as does part-time. It's 9 characters. So this is what a data dictionary looks like. How would you make one of these? Well, let's take a look at an example. Give this one a go. Pause the video and I'll give you 5 seconds to make your own data dictionary. This is what I came up with. This is an example solution, but you could have come up with other validations especially and field sizes. But the field names are quite obvious. If we go back to the example, you can see that we've got the field names down the left-hand side. We've got wrestler ID, name, ring name, date of birth, champion, and salary. And you can kind of get a feel, or you can assume what the data types are based on the data that is given here. You can see that wrestler ID, it's just numbers, so it's most likely going to be a number. Anything that has text in it must be a text field, so the name and the ring name, they're both going to be text. The date of birth, that clearly is a date, so we're going to store that as a date. Champion, it says true there, so I'm going to assume that that's Boolean. They either are a champion or they're not. And salary, you can see that's a number as well. The pound sign is in the field name. So when I set the field name in the data dictionary, you'll see that I included the pound sign there. As I mentioned earlier, field sizes are just what you would assume are the maximum you would ever need, and that no one's ever going to need more than this. So 70, I thought, for a name, it should be way more than enough, especially the ring name, but it is a reasonable amount of data that I've set there, field size. Wrestler ID would obviously be the primary key, and validation, I thought, well, if a wrestler registers with a wrestling federation, for example, they're going to have an ID. Every record will need an ID to identify them, and every person will have a name. They'd probably have a date of birth as well, but you could probably leave their ring name blank. Maybe they don't have one yet. And well, I suppose champion, because it's Boolean, it's never going to be blank because it's going to be false as default. And then you would have to set it to true. So we don't need to set validation for that because a Boolean field is its own validation in a way. For the salary, this is just something that I made up. I thought that my wrestlers database, they would have a minimum salary of 9,000 and there would be a maximum salary of 100,000. But when it comes to, for example, a coursework or an exam, you would only go based on the information that you were provided. So I would only add this information if the task told me that this was required. Hopefully that makes some sense. Right, that was a really quick rundown, but hopefully you are now the big daddy of data dictionaries.